A few weeks ago, I sat across from a young Iranian named Poya Nikmand. He had fled Iran at 18, only a few years before, about 6 years before, escaping a regime that would have killed him. And the journey that he told me out of Iran was brutal. For years, he endured abuse at the hands of traffickers who controlled his visa. And now he's in the United States trying to build a life and the country that he says is his favorite. So I took him to dinner, and I was just seeing if there's anything that I could do to help him with his visa situation. And he shared about the brutality of his life in Iran, and he describes it on a Substack that he has, and I will put that into the newsletter, and it's a way of supporting him. And also this week I had heard from a variety of our members who were concerned about the situation in Iran, asked if I would talk on this topic. And some of our extended congregation are Iranian Americans. One shared that she had like a mixed feeling, a feeling of relief that a regime which terrorized her family might finally face some consequences, and fear for the loved ones who are facing those consequences right now. So she's both hoping for regime change, and she's also terrified in the same breath. And that was not unusual from people. So I start with those stories today because I want to hold intention before we get to answers. The question that I want to wrestle with today is one of the hardest for Christians to ask, and that is war ever just? And more specifically, right now, is America's war with Iran a just war? And to get to that, we look each week to the Gospels, but the Gospels do not give us a clear theory of war. Jesus tells Peter to put away a sword. He submits to his own execution without resistance. And so Christians have been wrestling with this tension for 2,000 years, and three major approaches have emerged. The first is pacifism, and that's some Christians taking Jesus at literally when he says, if anyone strikes you on one cheek, turn the other. And so the Quakers and the Mennonites and many faithful believers across history refuse to take up arms under any circumstances. They believe that violence can not heal violence. And so that position deserves a lot of respect. It does leave a hard question. If a regime threatens mass destruction, is refusing to resist it morally sufficient? And then at the other end of the spectrum is a belief that war can be holy, that God blesses our national causes, that our enemies represent evil and we represent the righteous. And that would be Christian nationalism. History shows how dangerous this language can be. The Crusaders marched under the cross when they invaded. American expansionists called genocide manifest destiny. After September 11th, we heard God invoked to justify wars that didn't involve the people who had attacked us. So whenever a nation says God is clearly on our side, Christians should pause, because God is not a mascot for military ambition. And just last week it was reported that U.S. troops were told that the war in Iran was all part of, quote, God's divine plan. And a watchdog group reported that 200 soldiers sent complaints of their superiors using extremist Christian rhetoric to justify war. And then the third way of looking at this is called just war theory. And between these two, it lies right between these two poles. It begins really with Augustine in the 4th century. It's evolved over the centuries of Christian reflection. Augustine argued that war is always tragic but sometimes necessary. And he warned that cruelty, revenge, and hatred can corrupt even a just cause. So for Augustine, the purpose of war was never conquest. It was the restoration of peace. And that tone matters. War, even when justified, it should be sorrowful, not triumphant. So if those are the schools of thought, if we're going to look at just war, how would it fit with the situation with Iran right now? So I'll go through some of just war's criteria to help us figure this out, and you can draw your own conclusions, and I'll share mine. First is that it has to be done by legitimate authority. And so just war has always required that the war be declared by a proper authority through a proper process. So in our country in 1991, the Gulf War came after a congressional vote, a coalition of 35 nations. This war was launched without congressional authorization, without a vote, without meaningful debate. And frankly, the American people were informed after the fact. So when the democratic process is bypassed in a decision this grave, that would be one of the foundational tests of a just war that has not been met. Just war is also seen as a last resort. So the question is, has there been an actual act of aggression? Are we responding to a fear that might happen? Preemptive war is morally far more complex than defensive war. So to be clear, the threat is real. Iran is one of the world's most brutal dictatorships. Over the last few months, they've executed thousands of their own citizens. They run a police state. They funded terrorist proxies around the Middle East. They tried to kill our president, leaders, and Iranian dissidents in this country. They've pursued nuclear capability. But the tough question is capability the same as attacking us? Certainly a nuclear-armed Islamic theocracy would change the security landscape of the world, and so that fear is legitimate. The question is whether the military action will actually prevent what we fear, or does it set in motion consequences we can't control? So the question's not whether the regime is evil. The question is whether this war conducted this way, by these means, for the stated purposes, is the right response to evil. Those are different questions, and confusing them is one of the most dangerous things a nation can do in wartime. So fear alone is not a sufficient cause for war, and just war theory demands patience before force. So these strikes were launched while diplomatic negotiations over Iran's nuclear program were underway. And when military actions begin before diplomacy has been given a chance to succeed, you've not explored every road that might lead to peace. The next criteria is the right intention. Is the goal of the protection of the innocent? Is it regime change? Is it retaliation? Is it for political advantage? So when the architects of the campaign can't agree what the goal is, we should take notice. The stated rationale for this campaign has shifted repeatedly. When the intention is incoherent, that test has not been met. The next criteria is proportionality and the protection of the innocent. World military action can prevent harm, but it can also create more harm. So Iran is a nation of over 80 million people. Anyone with the memory of 2003 knows that what happens when the United States topples a Middle Eastern government. Iraq remains fractured today, 25 years later. So if the goal was regime change, the record for us in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya should give us pause. And modern warfare, even though there's some precision in some of the weapons, it makes protection of civilians painfully difficult. In just a few days, estimates are just beginning. 800 people were killed. I'm sure it's gone up even now, with an estimated 176 children. And there's a credible account, not completely verified, but of a girl's elementary school being hit with 165 deaths. And 6 Americans at least have been killed, and more to come. So these are not abstractions. These are real people, and these are children at school. So then Augustine asks, is the reason good? And Swedenborg takes it a step further and asks, is the love good? And so these are different questions. So now Swedenborg takes it a little deeper. Now Swedenborg is not a theorist sitting at a safe distance from war. He was an engineer. He served the King of Sweden over the Great Northern War. He designed the mechanism that moved ships over land, and he drew the first sketch of a machine gun. He was a loyal person to his king and his country. And yet, in his life, he opposed the Swedish invasion of Russia. And he watched a war of ambition drain the country's treasure, kill its men, and lose its moral standing. We don't think of this now, but before the war, Sweden was the dominant military power in Northern Europe. After that, the role passed to Russia. So he knew war from the inside. And when he came to teach it, he talked about the fact that there's an external war, but there's also an internal war. And the internal war is that for us, the true enemy is always our love of domination, our love of power over others. So that can affect regimes, but it can also affect nations that oppose them. Every nation, like every person, fights two wars at once, one with the enemy outside and one with the enemy inside. The second war is the one that determines whether victory heals or destroys. So Augustine asks whether the cause meets a moral criteria. Swedenborg asks, what's the love that's driving people in charge? A war can pass every external test and it can still be spiritually corrupt. So what's the intention of this war? Well, when the purpose of war is worldly glory, it ceases to be an act of charity. Swedenborg names the root plainly. It's the love of domination born of self-love, in his words. He says it's the very fire of hell. So the goal of a war has to be restoring peace, not conquest. Now, this last week, I have to say I've cringed when I listened to our own Secretary of War at times. He said, I stand before you today with one unmistakable message about Operation Epic Fury. America is winning decisively, devastatingly, and without mercy. He also said, we're playing for keeps, and said, we're punching them while they're down. And he brags about America's lethality. So this doesn't sound to me like a warrior praying for peace. That's the language of domination. It's the sound of a country that has stopped asking about just war. This week, the White House released a video on social media splicing clips from Iron Man, Gladiator, and Top Gun with footage of American bombs falling on Iran, and it read, "Justice the American way." So when a nation turns the killing of real people into superhero montages, the corruption that Swedenborg describes is no longer just a warning, it's a diagnosis. Swedenborg has a precise description of how this plays out. He says, when we look down on people just because they disagree with us or don't show us the respect that we want and deserve, that's the ego running the show. When we start hating them for it, going after them, we've gone deeper. And when we find ourselves fantasizing about their downfall, wanting them destroyed, something has shifted inside us. People who go that far end up falling in love with the cruelty itself. So contempt becomes hatred, hatred becomes vengeance, vengeance becomes cruelty, and that's the spiritual trajectory Swedenborg warns about and describes for both a person and for a nation. So here's the question it leaves us. Is not only is Iran dangerous, because it is, it's what's the deeper intention that's guiding us? Are we motivated by a love of our neighbor, or fear, or pride, or vengeance? Now, even a just war can corrupt the spirit if it's waged with hatred. The moral question is not whether the war is justified, it's what love is driving the decision. If the driving love is domination, the war is spiritually corrupt. So what should we as Christians be doing then? Well, like looking at Augustine and Swedenborg's criteria, I personally struggle to see how this war meets a just war criteria. And we are a community that is open to all perspectives, and we have our discussion afterwards. So I really welcome anyone who disagrees to share that, because I'm not here to tell you how to think or vote or anything like that. I'm just sharing from my perspective how I feel about it. So then the question is then, what do we do? And that is, there are things we can do. First of all, please never underestimate the power of prayer. I think we can pray for members in our own community and the people I've talked about who are Iranians. Pray for them specifically. Pray for the families of people who have been killed. Pray for our own soldiers. Pray for leaders on every side to choose restraint. Pray for the members of our congregation who are carrying fear. So if we do nothing else, I think pray, but pray specifically for those things. And we can also pray for a day when the Iranian people govern themselves freely. And Poya, who I spoke about earlier, wrote a piece this week, and he really lays out that there's been a huge resistance within Iran for a long time, particularly led by young people. And his quote was, "The bombs might finish the job, but our hope and gratitude belongs to freedom-loving Iranians who did the real work. So we can pray for the people of Iran who want regime change. Second, I know on topics of this, some people will say on a sermon like this or of current events, Rich, I purposely come to church to get away from the news. I want to hear a spiritual message, not talk about current events, which I'm trying to avoid. But I would argue that the temptation to turn away from current events is something that we as citizens don't have. We need to be informed. We don't mean that we're always going to get it right, but we do need to stay engaged and figure out how we can engage with our democratic process to bring about the changes that we seek. And I would also welcome us as a community to set up a night where we could discuss this more deeply. We could do a Zoom and have a conversation where we could get everybody and just go a little bit deeper, because I think this needs some processing. And just remind ourselves that in just war, it's not just victory, it's peace. And peace is not just the absence of enemies, it has to be the presence of justice. That comes without hatred. So in closing, I would just say the world feels very unstable at this time. And it's tempting to want certainty. And I think we're going to have to continue to live in this period of uncertainty. In summary, I would say if we come to war because it's necessary, and I believe it can be necessary, it has to be entered into with tears, not cheers. I found the Pope's comments this week very accurate. He said, whatever your politics, he said, rather, a spiral of violence before it becomes a prayer to halt the war, because it could lead to a spiral of violence before it becomes an irreparable abyss. These situations can lead to ignite other worse situations, so we want to make sure we pray for that not happening. I'll close with the prophet Isaiah, who said, there will be a time where they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nothing shall lift up a sword against the nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And my prayer for us is that we can ask God for how we in our personal life and in our community can live a life and be active to make this true. Amen. And now we will open it up for a discussion as we do each week. And particularly if you disagree with my take on it, that's just my take. I really do respect all perspectives. And so if you have a different perspective and feel like this has the makings of a just war, I would be open to hearing that as well, particularly. Ellie?
Hey, everybody. Good to see you all. Just one small exclamation. Rich hasn't seen me. He said I told him I might wear an eye patch because I have a thing of Bell's palsy going on with the virus, but it's temporary. And just to explain, I haven't seen some of you in a while. I guess I agree with you. That was beautiful. So well put. So astute. One of the best analyses, if you want, and sermons I've heard on it. Rich, thank you so much. But I guess I'm wondering, okay, if we don't think politics, if we don't think even religion, if we don't think just war in the traditional sense, I'm thinking of it as a mother. So let's say there's a child crying for help, screaming for help, begging for help. As recently in a movie called The Voice of Hind Rajab, it's about a little girl in Gaza who was stuck in a car and no one goes to her help, and she literally calls 911. And so thinking of, as an Iranian who's very emotional about this, maybe I can't think as rationally as I would like, but I would do anything to save my child, even if included violence. And I'm not proud of that, but a mama bear, out of love and pure intentions, would sacrifice her life, would sacrifice everything to save innocent people who are being terrorized or abused. And so, in that way, for me, this is a just war, but only in that way. The people throwing the bombs, I mean, just the name of it, epic fury, everything they say, it's just, I don't need to preaching to the choir, the old toxic um, leadership, you know, mentality is so sad to hear. I wish we had someone up there who was eloquent and kind and explained that this could be a just war, except our intentions aren't pure here. America's intentions and Israel intentions, but on an emotional side, as someone who has family there, someone who's been in exile, someone who's Christian and afraid to go back, someone who, it's justified. In my heart, it's justified.
Yeah, well, I really thank you for sharing that perspective because one, you're one of the people who reached out to me and said, "Hey, preach this topic," right? And it's very, very real for you. And so I think so I just want to say first, I respect your opinion that it's a just war, and then second, I would say I think we both have the same goals, and I completely agree with you. I tried to make the point that there have been many just wars where you're like the mother rescuing a child, like you're really rescuing people, and they're almost always defensive. This one, I'm worried about the glee and the attitude about it, because if you look at history, very often you're lighting a match to a bomb that you don't know. Like, in other words, they've said it's regime change, or they were going to be attacked first, or Israel wanted to do it, or a variety of reasons. What's the plan? In other words, could it be worse after the fact for the people? That's a concern too. But I understand the goal, and it could happen. And let's pray that it happens. And I know just if you've been under a terrorist leader and he's been killed, there's some joy in that. I mean, people, when Hitler was found in his bunker, people were very happy about that. So there's a certain, joy in seeing an evil person go. The question is, does our country, because I'm talking about our country, does our country have what it takes to, get the right people in and so forth, and get the right new regime in and change the regime, or, or not. So, but it's very complex, and I really do appreciate your perspective. And thanks for going first. And go ahead. You go ahead. Oh, you're on mute. You're still on mute.
Sorry. Okay. Just as a follow-up, absolutely, I don't feel joy. I feel like you said something when you said it should never war, no, under even when justified, should never be triumphed or feel joyful, but rather sorrowful. And yes, that's the other complex emotion. I'm so sorrowful. I don't, when I see the dancing on the streets, I understand what they're trying to say. And then, media, you get misrepresented. Those people aren't happy because people are dying. They're not happy because their country's being bombed. It just, I don't know, an expression, some way of showing that someone came for them, someone heard, someone is doing something about it. But I do wonder if, two questions for you. I wonder what you said about prayer. So recently I was in bed with this virus for 2 weeks and I couldn't do much. I even couldn't read, but I just prayed the whole time. I thought of Thérèse de Lisieux, who, one of the saints who's, all she did was pray. That's what she's a saint for, pray for missionaries. And I thought, if I can't do anything else, and like what you said, maybe we can just pray. And so let's say, how we talk about like on earth as in is heaven, like with these parallel universes, if there's a spiritual warfare alongside what's happening here, let's say enough of us pray that even though the intentions of the ones throwing the bombs and starting this war aren't good, if there are enough of us that pray with good intentions, do you think that could, I don't know what the word to use, but karmically alter the course of the result, the outcome of this? And that's question one. And then before I forget it, I just want to ask, I really believe there's some kind of new world order being shaped. Middle East has been such a hot mess since World War II. Maybe this is a chance to set things right somehow, even if it's a generation or two from now, at the beginning of that, planting the seed of that. And ironically, the this whole parallel universe, spiritual war versus here, and it is fascinating to me because the night of the first attack, Saturday, there was a planetary alignment of 7 planets that was pretty powerful. And as you know, Iranians, Zoroastrians who studied the stars and the planets, very much believe. I mean, the three kings saw the star when Jesus was born and took the, you know, get. They look to the stars. They look to the planets. There is some kind of parallel universe, some kind of. I think this new physicist calls it. Um, uh, um, uh, what's the hologram? Celestial holograph, where if in a 4D universe, or you know, that. So I wonder if there's something going on like that, and if our prayers can help, even if the reality of intentions on earth by most humans in this war, like it was very, I loved hearing that those soldiers wrote in and said, no, don't call that epic fury or a God's war for us. This whole mess was because people abused their religious power, from
Yeah,
the.
let me see if I can tackle those two. One, it was, do I think prayer has an impact? I think prayer has an impact beyond what we can even understand, so I never underestimate it. And I do know that people who have transitioned to the side, one of their comments is, if you knew the power of prayer, you would have prayed a lot more. So I think we don't really understand the power of prayer. I also think that God allows evil, but is always moving it toward good. So God is always trying to move it toward good. God doesn't create war. God is always moving toward peace. And so our prayers and just our thoughts and our mindset and everything else. So that's extremely positive. Second, you asked, are we coming into a new period? It certainly does feel like that we're coming into a new period. And I did notice that, a lot was going on, the blood moon, the signs, the star, the planets aligning, the war. But I will say, I don't necessarily see it as all, the new alignment as all good for democracy or the United States necessarily either. I think this is dangerous I think we have a lot of power right now, and we can accomplish a lot with military very quickly, but without humility and without a spirit of love for the neighbor, I feel it could have very dangerous consequences for us, not just for the rest of the world that we're attacking. I think it could backfire. So I saw the signs and I felt like a little ominous. That said, I would love to be wrong and see that, like, within a few months we have a new regime, that maybe the Kurds can have their battle and people can take to the streets. But I think it could also be a mess. So anyway, but we want to keep praying for the people. We want to pray for good. You never quite know what could come out of it. So I think you should keep that. So thank you for sharing that perspective, your unique perspective. And I think we all understand exactly where you're coming from too, as an Iranian who, would be persecuted right now if you lived in Iran. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. And yeah, does that answer your questions? Okay. Let me go to Natasha and to Joy. I think I saw at least 2 hands. Joy B, yes, right? Yeah, so Natasha and Joy.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you, Rich, for your sermon. This is very important sermon and question. And I would like to make a couple points, and I will try to be brief. First of all, I wouldn't put like is war is just. I would rather say if war as a defense or war is an offense is just. And to me, war is defense is just as an offense is not just. But it's my personal understanding. And second point I want to make, what we are talking about today, it's a consequence of our current situation. And the way I understand our current situation in the United States is the best it was described by a former Russian. He is a comedian, and he immigrated from Russia to the United States, and he says he was praying for Russia without Putin, and now he feels we're entering now in the United States, it's like becoming Russia without Putin. And I believe we're in a very dangerous time in history. And to me, it's like Germany in 30s or Russia with Putin, not quite in full mode. But to me, when you mention, ask what should we do, I believe we should follow the steps of your relative Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Nazi Germany, who was trying to explain to Christian majority who supported Hitler. So what is true Christianity? So this is my opinion.
Thank you. On the first point, I think, that's I tried to make the point. Swedenborg's pretty clear too in his writings that he says, like, essentially, defensive war is more the way of a just war, and offensive. The only thing I was trying to make a case is that many people are arguing that we were reacting to we're defending ourselves because they were going to attack. But that's right. And I'll never argue with you when you're bringing up Bonhoeffer in Germany and saying that we've got to, the church has to be aligned with peace and love and kindness and compassion, and not be brought into Christian nationalism of any kind. And that's what happened in Germany. The church endorsed the government, and we have to be careful. Joy, you're up next. Question?
I think that was a lovely introduction, bringing Bonhoeffer into it. But one hopes that the choice is not to be martyred, which was the choice that Dietrich perhaps did not know he was making, but was willing to take that risk. And I think one of the challenging parts of being a person of faith is understanding that even when there's no good choice, no choice that is clearly going to lead to good, to not choose anything but to stand silent is also to make a choice. Therefore, one has to pick something one can do and live with the risks and consequences of that choice. That living is one of the things that I think Swedenborgian theology is extremely helpful with, just because it causes one to think, reflect, learn, and choose again from any experience, no matter how challenging.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. I just saw in the chat, I'll read out loud in the chat. Does the government, Iran, have a defensive obligation in a covenant with its people to develop nuclear deterrence to defend against their adversary, Israel's nuclear arsenal, and demonstrate a will to strike first, distinct from the crimes against their own people, and a different justification with perhaps a non-aerial solution? So let's see. Does the government does Iran have a right to develop its own nuclear weapons? That gets complicated because everybody starts developing nuclear weapons as defense, and I'm afraid that'll be one of the outcomes of this situation. And I think also Ukraine, the world becomes more of a tinderbox. So but I think it certainly has a right to defend itself. I think where I would just push back on this a little bit is I think that Iran has not just been sitting there not defending itself. It has funded terrorist groups like it's funded Hamas, it's funded Hezbollah, and attacked Israel that way. So I wouldn't necessarily, I don't want to get into a discussion about geopolitics exactly because that's just my perspective, but that would be my take. that I don't think that they've been solely in a defensive situation, but I do think countries have a right to defend themselves. And next question, anything else? Malcolm?
It has always seemed to me that there's a kind of an air of cynicism and sanctimony about the term just war. I would think that it would be better to talk about the necessity of war. In other words, have we exhausted every other means that is available to dealing with some issue which concerns us before resorting to war? None of the justifications that I've heard from our government comes close to suggesting to me that war is necessary.
I think that's a great way to reframe it, actually. I think just war is a little bit, people kind of just write it off as kind of naive. And I think a necessary war that would be a better way of describing it. Or as Natalia was saying, a defensive war. Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. So thank you for that. Any last question before we? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not seeing those hands. Where do you see them? That's a thumb up. David has a thumb up. Is that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Reverend. Just a quick comment about the just war. It's also a very developed theory that is now in the Unified Code for Military Justice, is that a nation cannot use overproportionate violence against a smaller nation. Say, like one of our Trident submarines could literally obliterate all the Middle East. And you're not allowed to purposely attack civilians. You can't attack, say, hospitals, infrastructure. And when your enemy troops surrender, you have to treat them humanely. You have to care for them, give them medical care. And also at the just war, when Augustine was talking about, there was another doctrine that developed about the year 1000. It was called the doctrine of peace and truce, which was used in Europe at that time, where society somewhat broke down and there was just violence all over the place. And they were, trying to define, what's the best way to bring peace. Is that they always say, let's sit down at a table, talk things out first, and try to bring peace. But for we that we're not soldiers, the scripture does say, we are to pray for our leaders always, all the time, that they do things the right way. As you said, like prayer is very powerful because our prayers are in a spiritual world. The scripture says we really do not understand, that conflict between the good and the evil up there, but we have to pray.
Yes, and you've been a good reminder of that, and the power of that and the importance of it. And thanks for that background on it. I didn't know that those specific examples that you gave. So thank you, everybody. Once again, Church of the Holy City, we have such an informed discussion, and I really appreciated, particularly Ellie, with your perspective, being Iranian and going through this personally. So we'll, as a community, pray for you during this time because it's very stressful. And thanks for being a long-term member of this community from a distance in Los Angeles. So with that, I'm going to wrap up.